Welcome. Thank you for joining us for our program tonight in celebration of Native American Heritage Month. My name is Helen Liu, and I'm the Programming and Partnerships Manager at Cary Library. Before we begin, I want to take a moment to thank the Cary Library Foundation. Their support enables us to bring programs like tonight's event to you. I'd also like to thank Pastor Brent Miracle and Darius Combs, who's the Cultural Outreach Coordinator for the Mashpee Wampanoag Education Center, for partnering with Cary Library and making these programs possible. If you missed the 13 Moons and the Wampanoag Foodways program we hosted last year, you can watch them on our YouTube channel. Tonight, Autumn Jackson will demonstrate how to prepare a traditional butternut squash soup and share history of butternut squash. There's 3 sisters and the different ways they were used in the Wampanoag way of life. I will be sharing the recipe and the recap that will be sent to everyone who registered. If you have any questions, please submit your questions to the Q&A or chat, and Autumn will answer them as we go along. This program is being recorded and will be posted to the library's YouTube channel. Now I'd like to introduce our speaker. Autumn Starr Jackson is born a Mashpee Wampanoag Tribal Citizen of the Eel Clan. She works as an assistant teacher at the Children's House, and she's done that for 6 years. She interned at the Wampanoag Language Reclamation Project to help revive the Wampanoag language with the native youth. Autumn is a Fancy Shawl Dancer and travels to different powwows. Autumn was the Vice-Chairwoman of her youth council for 2 consecutive years. She is a very involved Wampanoag Tribal Youth and continues to learn from community leaders and different tribal communities. Welcome, Autumn. We are so excited to get started.
Hi, everybody. Winikisap natasuis Autumn mas masipia ka natai, North Carolina. Good day, families and friends. My name is Autumn Jackson. I am from Mashpee, and I currently live in North Carolina. Tonight, I will be demonstrating how to prepare butternut squash soup. I will also be talking about the history of butternut squash along with the 3 sisters and how they all played a vital role in the Wampanoag way of life. The word squash in our language, the Algonquin language, is called Askutasquash, which means eaten raw or uncooked. Squash is one of the 3 sisters, the other 2 being corns and beans. Each of these vegetables provided support for one another. The corn provided a growing structure for the beans to climb up, and the squash provided a better shade, mulch, to protect the corn and the beans from sunlight, weeds, insects, things such as that. We use these in many ways, and I'm actually going to go into the story of why we call them the 3 sisters. The 3 sisters is actually a story of sacrifice. The way that I was brought up on this story was that a tribe long ago, they were having a very hard harvest one year. And there were 3 sisters from the same mother of the tribe. And the 3 sisters talked to the creator, and these 3 sisters gave their lives. And that they were buried into the ground traditionally with no wrapping. They were just put back in how they came into this world naked. That being said, the 3 sisters, they came back as corn, beans, and squash. The tall corn, as I said, was the sister to the bean, and the bean was the sister to the squash, and they all provided stability for one another. The word squash is not for this specific butternut squash. The word squash in our language is used for all squash. Butternut squash, acorn squash, pumpkins, we actually kind of use the same word for as well. I have started to prepare. This is a butternut squash. This was not freshly picked. Traditionally, we would have a garden and we would go gather our own food. We would not have things such as grocery stores, etc., etc. In the pot, actually, I'm going to move my camera. I have started to boil here a butternut squash. It has been in for approximately 5 minutes now. So as I showed you my pot, I'm going to remove the butternut squash that I already started boiling. Sorry. Actually, the way that I'm preparing this meal is a more modernized way. We definitely would not be cooking on the inside. All of our meals were prepared outside under what we call a cooking arbor. Our meals were also made in big cast iron pots that we traded with the English. We would trade them our cast iron for things such as wolf fur, deer fur. We would trade different food items, jewelry, such as that. But a lot of the items that I'm going to be using tonight are not what I would be using back in the day. Such as we would not have knives like these. We would actually have deer knives or knives that we would trade with the English. My potato masher, which I'm going to be used to mash my butternut squash, we would not use these. We would use something that's called a mortar and pestle. It's wooden. Nowadays they come in marble, different types of different I don't know the word that I'm trying to use. Sorry. But we are going to take my pot over here.
We have a question about, could you tell us what a cooking arbor looked like?
Yeah, so a cooking arbor, most of our houses were all made out of pine trees. Our arbors were made out of pine trees because pine trees grow all year long, so they don't die. So we use those, we would soak them a week or two at a time. The structure, it was an open structure with the overhead would be pine boughs. And under it would be logs. We would have woven bags that would have our spoons, our forks, our bowls that were all burned and carved. As Helen said, my Darius, he actually makes a lot of traditional items such as bowls, spoons, machines. But going back to the cooking arbor, outside, and the fire would be in front of the cooking arbor. It would not be under the cooking arbor. With a long spigot over the fire. And on that would be the large cast iron pot, and next to it would be a smaller fire where we would use teas, and they would be in things such as clay pots, which we would get out just digging down the ground. But it's very simple. It's a very simple structure. Okay, so once you boil your butternut squash for about 5 to 10 minutes, it should be firm. You should be able to stick your knife through it. You don't want it to be too tender because when you boil it with your chicken broth and your water and your onions, it can turn into like very watery. So what I like to do first, I already pre-cut my squash in half. I dug out my guts, and for the guts, we would not waste. We believed in sustainability, and anything that we removed from the earth was eaten or used in another way. We also believed that if we remove something from the earth, we would give an offering such as tobacco or sage, because giving a life to take a life. So we would respect the land in that way. So if you've never cut a butternut squash before without boiling it, it's very hard, which is why I prefer to boil mine before. Easier to cut. A lot of people say that it's like cutting a watermelon. I do not agree. After that, I'd like to go into smaller sections. And this will be hot. So if you don't have cooking hands, you can let it cool off for however long. I've been doing this for a while now, so I'm kind of used to the heat. But there's 2 ways that we can do this. Back in the day, we could just peel the skin off like this. But my butternut squash is not all the way. So just slightly take your knife and the skin will come right off. Things like this, we would put back into the ground as fertilizer. There was really not much use for the skin. Once you get them peeled, they're going to get into, you can cut them into cubes like this, smaller. I prefer a chunkier soup, so I like mine kind of big, and when I mash them, I don't mash all the way. Once you finish cutting all of your squash, you should have about some nice sized cubes like this. Depending on the size of your family, I usually use about 2/2 of the butternut squash. Well, 1/2 of the butternut squash because I'm only cooking for 2 people. Depending on the size of your family, a family of 4, I would say maybe 1 butternut squash is enough, depending on the amount of chicken broth you use, the amount of water, and depending on how you like the texture of your soup, is how that will play out. Okay, so next we have onion. Traditionally, this is a white onion. We do not have white onions. We would most likely use scallions or things that would grow around our garden, like as a fence. Do I have a scallion? I do have a scallion. Anyway, if you've never seen a scallion, they're green and they have a bulb at the end. The bulbs we would cut off and use to boil in our soups, which I don't have today, which I would love. But we are going to dice up our onion. If you don't have a white onion or a green onion, it's okay. I usually use a yellow onion if I don't have anything on hand. So I'm using a 1/2 onion because it's only 2 of us. And I start by cutting it in half to get my nice dices. And I take my knife and I slice inward about 2 rows. And then I turn my onion and I slice down, and make sure not to cut all the way up to the top. And you will not get those nice diced cubes that we're looking for. Growing up, actually, I did not like squash. So this is something that my mom had to make me eat. So growing up, no. If you have children and they do not like vegetables, you can modernize the soup. If they like a sweeter soup, you can add maple syrup or brown sugar. Traditionally, we would trade for maple syrup, which we would use in other dishes, which I will get into later, talking about corns and beans. Once you get your onions diced, as so, you want to take, I'm using a smaller, I have a small household, so I'll be using a medium-sized saucepan, about this big, and throw your onions into there. Here and switch my camera around. You want to let those cook until they're brown, caramelized. I'm not adding oil to this. I'm going to let them caramelize because if we add the oil in now, it'll turn the soup brown. We use garlic for everything as Native people. I still use it today. If you do have a garlic, I prefer fresh garlic rather than pre-chopped minced garlic because it gives it a more bolder taste. I also, bay leaves. Fresh bay leaves are obviously better, but this is only what I have on hand as of now. You only need 1. Bay leaves are very potent in flavor and they will heighten the flavor of your soup very well. Okay, let's go. I'm gonna go stir the onions, see, caramelize them. They're gonna get there. Make sure you keep your heat on a medium to low to not burn your onion because nobody wants to burn tasting soup. Once you have your onions in the pot, you want to get your butternut squash in hand. For me, I will be using 1.5 cups of chicken broth to 1 cup of water. Depending on, like, I use less sodium in my chicken broth because I like to season to taste. Once you get those onions caramelized, before you add in the chicken broth and the water, you're going to add in your butternut squash to soak in that onion flavor. But 1 cup of chicken broth, I'm going to let that sit for probably 2 minutes. Oh, also to peel off the skin, since we are in a new age, you can use a potato peeler, which will take it off if you do not boil it. You can use a potato peeler. I also noticed that a lot of people do bake their butternut squash. We did not have obviously ovens or anything as such back then, so everything that we had was boiled or baked in a fire. Okay, that is boiling. So you are going to take your 1.5 cups of chicken broth to your 1 cup of water. I'm cooking for a family of 2, so I didn't need that. Once you get those in, you want to turn your heat up to about a medium. I put it in between medium and 6 so that it gets a light boil, but not too much of a boil. I also, I'm gonna get a bigger bay leaf. You get your bay leaf. I'm not gonna chop up my onion. I'm just gonna smash it in the middle to open that up so that the flavors. Take these. That goes in there. Cover, and we're gonna let that boil for about 10 to 15 minutes, or until tender. If you're able to stick your fork or your knife through it, then it is done. It's ready to go. So, I guess going back to the 3 sisters, one of corn. Corn is one of the 3 sisters, and we would use corns for things such as flour, making bread, porridge, or we would dry it out. When we would dry out corn, we would actually use a mortar and pestle, which is a wooden bowl that has kind of, what would you call that? Like a peg, and you kind of mash everything together. So when we would dry out corn and we would put it through the mortar and pestle, it would turn into a flour, a cornmeal. Sorry. And from cornmeal, we would make things such called ash cakes. Ash cakes are cornmeal. You could add dried cranberries, walnuts, or whatever. Add water, and you would make those into like kind of like a patty. And we would take grape leaves. They're very large leaves. We would soak our grape leaves overnight, and for the next day, we would wrap our cornmeal patties inside of the grape leaves, and we would actually heat up ash, and we would stick the grape leaves in the ash, and that would actually cook and bake the ash cakes to make them into almost like a bready texture. With corn, we would also make things, which is one of my favorites, is called nasam. Nasam is a porridge-like soup. It's made from cornmeal. You can add whatever you like. We would trade maple syrup, as I said. So I would have mine with walnuts, cranberries, dried blueberries if we had them, and maple syrup if we were lucky on that day. Beans. Beans were also used for soups. Beans could be dried. And for us to dry things such as the acorn squash, butternut squash, and pumpkins, they would be cut into a spiral, and they would be dried out in something that's called a minute. A minute is a storage bag. These storage bags are fairly large, and we would dig a hole in the ground that acted kind of like freezers as of today. But instead of that, we would dig holes, and we would line our holes with cedar mats. And these cedar mats would act as like insulation. So after that, we would take the minutes, put them inside of the hole with the cedar mats, and cover them up. And those would last through winter. Or if we needed them in the winter, we could go dig them up. But we would also use those for things such as corn, such as necklaces. I'm not sure if anybody has seen corn necklaces going around. They turn beautiful colors. So a lot of people do like to make jewelry. So corn husk can be used for multiple things. The actual little fibers that come off of corn husk can be used for medicinal purposes, inflammation, cramps, things such as that. We would boil those fibers into a tea, and we would drink that. And if you were feeling ill or had indigestion or anything like that, it would take those feelings away. The corn husk itself, we would make corn husk dolls. My mom, actually, she I would say she's a professional and she's in making corn husk dolls. They're very intricate. I wish I had one to show y'all today. And they do take a lot of time. If there's ever a chance, Helen, when you can do a corn husk making class, that would be fantastic. But for other than corn husk dolls and medicinal purposes, corn was just ate and dried and saved for other things that we would use it for in the winter.
So you talked about using the minute for preserving your food. Are there other ways that the Wampanoag people preserve their food?
Yes, if we are not talking about corns, beans, and squash, other meats such as like deer meat, shellfish, we would smoke. So we would smoke fish like herring, halibut, flounder, and we would smoke shellfish as well. And that would also last us through the winter because it could be buried in the ground as well. For things such as meat, we would hang dry. In our houses, depending on the size of your family, they have different names. I will just say, in a Weekuw, you would hang dry your meat over the smoke hole. In our houses, the word nush means 3. The word Weekuw means house. So that's a 3-person house, Weekuw. So in that house, there would be 3 open fires, and each fire would have a smoke hole. And under that smoke hole would be a rack, and you would dry your meat. You would thinly slice it, and you would hang it, and the smoke would dry it up. And you can leave it up there for as long as you want because it would be good to eat. If you want a snack, if you're hungry, you would just go up there and you would grab a piece of meat. That being said, it is a Nush Weekuw. So each fire is for a generation of a family. So that fire in the back of the house would be your elders. So that fire with their meat would be considered their fire meat, but obviously you can share with your family. What else did we do? We didn't have, we ate a lot of gamey meats in the winter. So most of the meat that we had, we ate right away. So, and a lot of things such as like summer squash and green beans, those were also eaten right away. They weren't dried or saved to use for other things. We reuse a lot of our stuff. If we cannot reuse it in a meal, somebody will find a different way to use it. Trying to think of, an acorn squash, to get that green color for paints and things such like that, you would actually dry out the skin of the acorn squash because it has that bright green color. And once that gets dried out, you would take your mortar and pestle and kind of grind it into a powder. And that powder you would use as face paint. And that's kind of the same thing that we would use the charcoal from the fires for, which would be mounded up into a mash and put on your face to go hunting. And kind of like camouflage is what that would be used for. If anything that we would not use would be put back to the earth, which is why we do give an offering when we remove things from the earth, because if we're not using them, we give them back. But if waste, we're saying thank you, katapatash. So, like today, when we all live in one house today. In my tribe, the Mashpee Wampanoag Tribal People, we lived in more than one house depending on the season. So in the months of spring and summer, we would live closer to the water because our diet would mostly be shellfish and things that we would get from the sea. Our houses would be made out of cattail reeds, which we would go and harvest. Cattail reeds could also be used to make mats and things, which we would line the inside of our winter homes as well. Our summer houses were, I want to say, not too far inland, but close enough to where you can see the water. All of our houses are round and domed so that the wind would just blow over our houses. And for the winter, we would leave our summer homes where they are, closer to the shore, but we would remove the cattail mats and we would go inwards. And that's when we would build our Weekuws that are made out of, what is that? Not pine. Yeah, it is cedar. We would use cedar trees that the men would go and cut down. Cedar trees way back in history were very large, so it would take a link of 8 to 10 men around the trunk to just go around that tree. And like nowadays, we did not chop trees. We would actually pack the tree with clay at the kind of around the top, and we would burn it from the base so that the tree would fall down. Our winter homes were also round, and they were also called long houses because they were very long and they were wide and they were ovular. Again, so that the snow would fall off and that you're distracting me. And so the snow would fall off, rain, storms, we would be protected from things like that. Also, our doors were very low to the ground. Our men were tall, 6 feet or taller. So our men would have to crouch down to get into our homes. And our doors were with deer hides. The flaps of the doors were deer hides. The doors to our houses were so low so that families could know if intruders were coming in, because if you didn't walk into the house right, you would bump your head, and that would alert the people in the family that there's somebody entering your home that's not supposed to be there. Going back to the home structure, the back of the home is the grandparents, the elders. The middle of the home is the children, and at the front of the home would be the mother and the father. They would be considered the protectors of the family, obviously. I'm gonna check on my squash. Okay. So my squash and everything, I'm gonna turn my camera before I compare mine. Is boiled. I can put my fork through, spoon. They should be tender. Okay. This is my favorite part. And so from here, if you do not want a soupy soup and you want it to be more thick, which I do, I like to remove a half a cup of water. Well, or of the broth, and I like to save it just in case. Today I'm going to be using a potato masher because I like my soup chunky. I do. Waste. I think this still might be too much water, but you can go in and give it a slight smash. Again, to food sustainability, we would not waste our carcasses of our birds. So if you had a soup like this, you could put in your turkey carcass, which would boil away any excess meat, the fat, which is very hearty for us. Our people love the hearty fat soup. And you could throw that in here. They did not do that when I was a child. Also, for the cornmeal, if your soup does become watery, you can take cornmeal. I'm not going to use the cornmeal, but you can sprinkle some of this cornmeal to thicken your soup, because again, it is like a flour. Flour is used as a thickener, and you can use that like that. Let me try this. I'm gonna pour it into a bowl so that you can see. What
do you usually serve it with?
So yes, again, from the cornmeal that we would use from corn, you can make a boiled bread, which is just cornmeal. Again, you could add whatever you would like, onions, any type of seasoning that you would have, most likely some type of onion powder or something that we would dry and grind in to make some type of flavor. But boiled bread was actually one of my favorite things to make. It's very easy. Half a cup of water to probably a cup of cornmeal, and it'll be not like a dough, kind of like a bread pasty like texture. And you would take those and you would put them in a boiling pot, and that would only take about 90 seconds for those to cook. And you could either place them in the soup or you could eat it on the side as like a bread or you can dip it into your soup as well. Or ash cakes is something that could go along with a soup, is which we would most likely use. If we traded things with the English, like bread, things that we wouldn't be able to make because we didn't have those type of utensils or a wood fire, how they cooked, we would trade to use things.
So is your cornbread pretty dense because you're not using any kind of leavening agent kind of thing, which you probably
Yes, it is
have?
very thick. It does not have that fluffy kind of texture that you would get if you're making a regular cornbread from the box, or with just regular flour, because cornmeal does have a grit to it. So you will taste that. And I'm not sure if anybody has known what a dumpling is, but it kind of has a dumpling texture, just more gritty. Boiled bread is, I would say, add onion and some seasoning to it. Also, for the seasonings, I only use salt, pepper. You can season it to taste. I would say about, depending again on the size of your pot, I'm only probably going to use about a teaspoon of salt and a dash of pepper. Traditionally, my mother, we would not use seasoning at all. We would eat the meal how it was prepared and taken from the ground, fresh and with all the natural nutrients that it came with. Okay, but yes, again, we would not use these bowls. We would have wooden bowls, we would have wooden spoons, kind of like these, but they were actually not. Our spoons were very deep, kind of like, they were deep in the sense that they were long and they had like a deep hole like this. We did not have forks. Forks did not come on about till later, I guess, when I would say when combs were starting to be brought back along. Food that would require a fork, we would eat with our hands, but things for soup and that, it would either be drinking out of the bowl or you would eat it with a wooden spoon or a wooden cup. Yeah, so I guess we can, I'm not gonna pour it, I'm gonna grab a ladle because the soup is very hot right now. And then I guess I can talk about the Muhkaysak Weekuw.
Yeah.
Helen had mentioned earlier that I was a teacher at the Muhkaysak Weekuw. It's called the Children's House. It's a Native American Montessori school for my tribe. My daily duties, I had to learn a lot. So a lot of my time was spent training, learning my language, which is a vigorous task. But luckily for me, I grew up learning my language. So I've been speaking my language since I was 3 years old. So it was very easy for me to get acclimated into that setting. And all of our children come from a tribal household. So if you do not have a parent or somebody that is of a tribal community, they would not be able to come to our tribal school, which is sad, but our kids love it. Our tribal school is based on our tribal land. We actually just, we've been federally recognized for a fair while now, but we actually just got our land back into recognition again. So we actually were able to put our tribal school back onto our reservation, which was amazing. Our school ranges from ages 2.5 to 9 years old. We're currently trying to add grade level 4. So we're only going up to grade level 3. And we do not teach in a direct hands-on way. The Montessori way is for the students to be the teachers. I can honestly say I learned a lot more working with the children in the Montessori school than I did with the children from a public school. A lot about our school is we want our children to have their own identity, to be able to be who they are. They grow up learning what we call the the 7 blessings. That's a very long talk, but from the first day that our children come to the school, they are greeted in our language. Winikisa, Sankunai, how are you? And with them being so young, they really do not know how to go back and talk well. But not only that, a big part of the school was getting the children to go to the community and speak with elders. A lot of our youth today are not really in tune with our elders and talking to their community, or asking for help for outreach. So that was kind of my role, was gathering children, I did a lot actually. I helped teach cultural classes. We did community nights for the kids where they would get to dress up in their regalias and get to showcase to the parents and people in the community basically what they learned during the week. Each season we had a different lesson plan. So this month is Native American month, so the children would be learning about different meats. This time of the year, we actually would take the children out to see turkeys. They would see turkeys get slaughtered. We've taken them to see deer get cut up, to show them, like, if this is how we were back in the day. We would go and hunt our animals and we would kill them, we would cook them. So that was interesting the first time the kids seen a duck get slaughtered, but it was a great experience for the kids to have. And I know a lot of people might think that it's harsh for young children to see that, but we live in a harsh reality, and the way that we hunt our food is healthy, way more healthy than the food that you would buy from the stores. Let me think. Last year, the children and we actually dried out deer meat and we made deer jerky, which was a lot of fun. We would do things like pickling, make arts and crafts with the kids, beading classes, sewing classes. We recently just had a ribbon skirt making class where all the ladies in our class got to make ribbon skirts, and the males got to make ribbon shirts. Also going back, we're a matriarchal tribe, which means the men would follow the wife's family. So instead of it kind of being the other way around, the men would take the wife's last name, the men would go move with the wife's family. So women played a large role in the Wampanoag community. Yeah, Helen, anything else?
Yeah, sure. Do you want to talk about the Wampanoag Language Reclamation Project?
Yes. The Wampanoag Language Reclamation Project, short WLRP, was actually started up, I want to say going on 15 years now. My mom was actually one of the first people to join in WLRP in getting our language back, which is why I know so much about the language. Jessie Littledoe Baird, I'm not sure if anybody has heard of her. She's very well known in Indian country. She was the chairwoman, vice-chairwoman of our tribe. She has won multiple awards, and she is the reason why our language is back today. She had started WLRP as a way, it started off with around 4 or 5 people as a way of just getting the language back into the community. That took about 3 or 4 years for people to actually start to get involved and wanting to learn the language. And from there, Jessie, along with a lot of tribal women in the community, they came together and they decided that they're going to just start hosting tribal classes. And they would call around the community and say, hey, we're having a language class tonight. If you would like to come, please come. It's great. I would say a lot of the WLRP revival was more in the beginning was focused towards the elders and adults. I would say nowadays, for the past 12 or so years, the language revival has been directed towards our tribal youth and teenagers. Just because it is hard to learn another language the older you get. So that's why us opening a school and starting our children out speaking Wampanoag at a young age, from age of 2.5 until hopefully forever, was one of the ways that we were trying, WLRP was trying to keep the language revitalized. We have our own dictionary, a Wampanoag dictionary. You will not be able to find it. A very select few people have it. We have prayer books, we have songs in our language, and our language, we only have, I want to say, 12 letters in our alphabet. So a lot of our words that we say, let me think. A lot of our words are one words, but they mean a sentence. So Washkinanyuak means like hello families. But that's just one word. It's not, it wouldn't be 2 words. Actually, if going back to Jessie, her younger daughter, I'm not sure if you may have heard of her. Her name is May. May, actually, she's younger than me, but May was actually fluent in the Wampanoag language before I was. She actually grew up from birth speaking Wampanoag, which is amazing. And I hope one day that I can pass along my language to my kids, and they so on and so on, because it's important. Storytelling with our elders. Not a lot of people want to sit down with the youth the elders these days, or just get that knowledge of, you know, like colonialism and how we're so colonized nowadays, which is a big part of our school as well, is making sure we're decolonizing the way we as teachers think, but the way children think as well, which is very hard because I find myself all the time using a lot of colonized things when I'm in the classroom, which is not okay. But even myself, I'm still learning every day, new things every day, about my tribe, about my culture. I'm still, my mother, we do moon lodges. Moon lodges, again, are in Luitus, but these moon lodges are only specific for women. Moon lodges, we say moon because when women are on their monthly, we're moony, I guess, we're moody. So we would call it our moon. And during that time, we would actually go into these moon lodges, and they would be kind of filled with smoke, but not like a smokehouse, cool, but smoky. And you would sit in there with the other women, and you would talk about how you're feeling, let it out. Some people would just cry. You're very emotional during that time of your life. So moon lodges is something that I do want to try to get into. I see we had a question, but I couldn't read it.
Yeah, so someone asked, can you share a story with us, perhaps one you heard from your elders?
Yes, I see my elders, well, before I moved to North Carolina, I would see my elders every day. I guess my favorite story that I was told would be of the Pukwudgies. So the Pukwudgies are called little people, like we would call them little people. And an elder in my tribe, her name is Anita Peters, and she has this little puppet, the cutest little man. You might be able to find him on YouTube or something. I can have Helen send y'all the link if I find it, but he's a little puppet. And she brings him around powwow, and he does his little dance. And then she goes and she tells the story of where the Pukwudgie came from. They call him Leonard. She said that one night she was sitting at a fire and she was with her dad, her uncles, her brothers, and she was sitting at a fire. And she said out of nowhere, in the corner of her eyes, that she seen a little shadow, but she didn't pay any mind to it. But she had her purse on the ground, and her keys were in there. And so when it was time to leave, she remembered seeing the little shadow. The little shadow was the Pukwudgie, and the Pukwudgies took her keys. I never believed the story. I promise you, I never believed the story. Until one day, I don't know if you guys lose stuff, keys, phones, shoes, things just go missing. Well, I believe those to be the little Pukwudgies playing games. We call them tricksters. That was one of the stories. A stories that our elders would also tell us to scare us, to get us to act right, was the story of Granny Squannet. Granny Squannet was a woman who lived by herself in the woods. She liked to be alone. Her family died. So she was a very lonely woman. She liked to be to herself. So to scare us, if we were acting up, not listening to our parents, they said, "You want to go see Granny Squannet?" No. Granny Squannet, they told us she was a scary woman. She was a scary woman that had long hair that covered her face, and she had one eye in the middle of her forehead, so that even when she wasn't looking, she was looking. One day, my mom told me this story about the son. He was not listening to his dad, and the dad told him that if you're not going to listen, Granny Squannet is going to come and take you. The son did not believe his father, and one night, Granny Squannet came and she took the boy. They traveled across the river, down the pond, and they finally came to where they say she lived on Turtle Island, which is in Massachusetts, Cape Cod. They say she lived on Turtle Island. So she brought the kids up to Turtle Island, and they say that she would not return you until you understood, like you took accountability, and she would make you work. So she would not return you to your parents until she felt that she was ready for you to go back to your parents. I still use that today. Granny Squannet on the children. What other stories do we have? I guess the story of Mashpee. Mashpee. I'm not sure if you've all heard of Aquina, or Nantucket or Martha's Vineyard. Those are also in Massachusetts, Cape Cod, part of the islands. The story of Mashpee believed that he was a giant, and the way that Martha's Vineyard was created was because he walked from the mainland over to the island, and his foot created the pathway between the mainland and Martha's Vineyard. That is the story that we told. We were also told that Mashpee was so tall that he was able to hold up whales. And I'm not sure about that story, but that was what I grew up on hearing just from different elders.
More questions for Autumn? Let's get a look at that wonderful soup that you made.
Yes, chunky. I like mine chunky. Also, the bay leaf is very potent, so I would not recommend just biting into that. It will leave not the best taste in your mouth.
Thank you. And so we will be sending out a recipe and any other links that Autumn mentioned today. Thank you so much, Autumn, for sharing all of your stories and your recipes. And thank you all for joining us tonight.
Autumn.